No, they didn't do it. No.
Oh, you have this hair? How long is that?
Let me know when we're all ready. Okay, we're ready. 2 hours. Something.
Good morning, and welcome to day 4 of this plenary session. This is our final day of the March plenary. We have one topic of substance on the agenda today, risk response. We're going to have a discussion in public session, and then we're going to workshop again after our coffee break. The one thing I remind you is that we're not problem solving right now. We're in the information gathering phase of the project, which means we're trying to identify all the issues and public interest objectives of the project and seeking your views on do we have a comprehensive list? Are we thinking of the right issues? Are there elements or nuances to the issues that need to be explored today? So again, I know it's always tempting to say, think about what we should do. We're not to that phase of the project yet. So I'm going to turn it over to Jasper and team right now. Jasper, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Tom. Armand, can you go to the next slide? So this is the first time that the risk response workstream will be discussed by the board, and therefore I'd like to introduce the team working on this project. So first of all, we have the staff team. We have Anna, Megan, Isabel, Henken, and myself. In addition to the staff team, we have the focus group who provided us with valuable input during the development of the issues to date. The members of the focus group are Julie, Vishal, Sachiko, Edo, and Warren. Armand, can you go to the next slide? Let me walk you through the agenda of today. We will start with the plenary session, and we will focus on the applicability and completeness of the issues identified by us. After the morning break, we will have a private workshop session that is closed to the public. In this private workshop session, board members, TAs, and staff will split up in 5 groups and will be asked to reflect on specific questions. The goal of this session is to obtain a deeper understanding of the selected issues identified. For both sessions, it is important to note that we will be focusing on the issues, as Tom mentioned as well. The reason for that is that we need to have a good understanding of the issue to find the right solution. So this is critical for us to develop, further develop to a project proposal. Can we go to the next slide? As noted earlier this week, the risk response workstream is part of the integrated project, together with the audit evidence workstream. A little bit of background for everyone who didn't attend the September and December board meeting. In December, the board approved the strategy and work plan for 2024 to 2027. In the strategy and work plan, we agreed to pursue an integrated approach on audit evidence and risk response. This was based on the view from respondents to the strategy and work plan that there is a need to concurrently address the revisions to ISA 500 and ISA 330 with a focus on technology and internal control. Under the integrated project, the risk response workstream focuses on the performance aspects relating to the design and performance of further audit procedures that are responsive to the assessed risk of material misstatement. So in doing so, we're focusing on ISA 330 and ISA 520. The risk response workstream has close relationship with the work performed on two projects that were discussed yesterday: the audit evidence project and the technology posture. On the technology posture, I would like to highlight that where the board landed on the technology posture will have an impact on the scope of this project. To a certain degree, there is some overlap between the issues we are dealing with. For example, such as whether there should be a requirement to use technology. More on that later, when we will introduce the issues we identified in ISA 330 related to technology. On audit evidence, in developing the issues presented to the board, we leveraged off the excellent work performed by that task force. And this is a good segue to the next slide. And the next slide shows what we've done since the December meeting to identify the issues related to ISA 330 and ISA 520. First of all, we went back to previous consultations, which included a wealth of information about issues in ISA 330 and ISA 520. It is important to note that some of the issues were described at a very high level. This was especially the case for issues identified in previous consultations on the strategy and work plan and on the work plan for 2022 and 2023. Therefore, we'll need to obtain more information related to some of these issues, and therefore it's so important that we discuss those in the private workshop sessions. We also reviewed recent inspection finding reports, which especially helped us to identify issues relating to internal control. And given the close linkage this project has with audit evidence technology, we liaised with these groups. And last but not least, we obtained the input from the focus groups, who helped us to identify issues and to more clearly describe the issues we had identified. So directly and indirectly, a lot of people around in this room have been involved in the information gathering, and I would like to thank everyone for their help. Armand, can we go to the next slide? First, we will discuss the drivers for revising ISA 330. Later, Anna will guide you through the drivers that for revising ISA 520. So based on all the information gathering we did to date, we identified four main drivers. The first one is the revision of ISA 315. In the development of ISA 315, there were already calls for revising ISA 330 as well at the same time, given the close relationship between these standards. These calls have never stopped. The second one is aligning with proposed ISA 500, which led to the call for an integrated project. The third driver are calls for addressing technology in responding to ROMs. And lastly, there were calls from regulators and others to enhance the auditor's work effort related to internal controls. All issues we have identified so far can be allocated to these drivers. It is important, another thing which is important to note is that in the information gathering, we did not, well, at least this is our view, it did not indicate to us that ISA 330 is fundamentally broken. This was also indicated by some respondents in previous consultations. However, in our view, the issues identified highlight the need for a revision of ISA 330 to clarify and strengthen some of its principles. Isabel and Henken will guide you through these four drivers today. And with that, Isabel, can I hand it over to you to go through the drivers related to ISA 315?
Yes, okay. So as you mentioned, Jasper, there was some recurring comments from previous consultation about the need to align the revision that was made in ISA 315 with 330. Those were really included in the consultation, the comments received on the consultation for the strategy and work plan, and also the work survey for the work plan 2022-2023. However, the comments that we received were not really explaining why, or not a lot of the comments were explaining why we needed the revisions in 315. Sorry, we're driving revisions in 330. So we did a little bit of digging and we had some additional conversation. We met with Josephine just because she was closely involved in the 315 revisions, just to understand more. We also read in details the basis for conclusion and the EM for 315 to understand what concepts were introduced in that project, the rationale behind it, how could that drive a change to 330. We met with the focus group, we got their input as well. And then with that, we identified 3 issues to better align those 2 standards. As Jasper mentioned, they're very closely linked together. There was a 4th issue or another topic, which is internal control, because 330 had a lot of revisions towards understanding the entity system of internal control. And some respondent noted that there was a misalignment right now on the work effort for the risk assessment procedures and the responses. But we've moved those issues into the 4th as a 4th driver, so a separate one. So they're a little bit linked with 315, but also they're separate. So we're going to discuss those later, but we haven't forgotten about them. So the 3 issues that we come up with or that we identified were, the first one is related to paragraph 18. So some respondent noted that there have some difficulties operationalizing that requirement, specifically or mostly due to the stand back requirement that was introduced in 315. So there's some circularity there, and the respondent were asking for more guidance on how to operationalize that. The second one is around the spectrum of risk, so the inherent risk. It's not a new concept in the ISAs, it was introduced before. However, it was new to the risk assessment procedure, and now respondent were asking, how does that flow into the responses to risks? And then the third issue is something that I know the IAASB always look at when revising standards, scalability. A lot of people noted that there was a lot of effort around scalability put into 315, and they encouraged the IAASB to do the same when revising 330. So those were the 3 main issues that we identify with that. So I think now ready to give it back to you, Tom, for matters. And just to note, like, this paper was written on with this as a staff-driven model, so it's really the perspective of the staff. So I encourage all board members, including the focus group members. I know we got your input, but we made some changes after, so happy to take views of everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, this is really focused on 315 related issues. Any reaction? Eda.
Maybe just an element of support. So the 33018 is by far the most discussed topic in this context that we see in practice. So that's definitely one where some further clarity or even the necessity of it should and could be considered.
Julie?
Very similar thoughts. I think this is one of the key, one of the key issues in this project. A lot of work went into implementing ISO 315 revised. So there's obviously a call for making sure that 330 is an appropriately robust standard as well. I think there have been some challenges on implementation, so hopefully that'll rise up through the some of the discussions we have in the future, because if there were any consequences out of the implementation that we want to consider in revising 330, I think this is a good time to do it. So I'm supportive of this topic.
I'd be supportive of getting rid of that awful acronym. Oh my God.
That's not going to happen.
Yeah.
Sorry.
An acronym that only auditors could love, right? Created by auditors to create a guild-like feel to it. Anyone else on 315? Okay, I think we could move on to, by silence, in addition to the highlight of that topic, I assume that there are no other issues that should be explored related to the alignment with ISA 315. Philly? You don't need it, you don't, silence means you agree, but Billy wants to come in.
No, sorry, I just wanted to clarify because I think Julie, what you mentioned might actually fall into that second question where you say there has been implementation challenges with 315. So I think we might pick up a few things there that could actually have to, well, that may have to flow through to 330.
Yeah, sorry if that sounded cryptic. I meant that I think the issues that we've identified are the issues. I think some of them are potential things we can do from a standard setting perspective, and some of them are implementation issues. And we're probably going to get to a place where some are going to fall into either category, right? So.
Okay. Anyone else? Yes.
And that's maybe a good clarification as well to Julie's point. Like it's like right now, this is the first list of issues we're having, and of course, based on those whole list of issues, we're going to see what we're going to do. Whether there is a change to the standards is needed. But it's, of course, it's good to have all the issues first, and then we can go from there.
So go back to you, Isabel. Hankin.
Yeah, I'm kind of short on that area. Thank you for the assistance, Julie. So thank you, Isabel and Tom. So I'd like to turn the board's attention now to the second bucket or category of issues in revising 330. Now, given the interconnections between both standards, respondents to previous consultations noted that ISO 330 would need to be aligned with proposed ISO 500 revised. And with respects to issues 4 and 5 in there, as you may be aware from our discussions yesterday within the proposals for ISO 500 revised, they have now enhanced their application material. This was from previous discussions actually with the board to describe ADT and explain the interrelationship of the sufficiency, appropriateness, and persuasiveness of audit evidence. Now, given the relevance of the term and these concepts when responding to risk in ISO 330, the standard would really benefit from leveraging all the good work that the Audit Evidence Task Force have done in this area. It may be worthwhile to note that within the ISOs, the term AT&T is used within application material within ISO 200, 220 revised, 315, 600, and now within proposed ISO 500, but not in ISO 330. And as discussed by the board yesterday, how the IAASB will be using terms like technological resources and AT&T within its standards would need to be informed by obviously the board's technology position or posture, which will consequently impact the term that will be used in revising ISO 330. Now, with respect to issues 6 and 7, just to provide the right context on this one. So the board yesterday expressed support for proposals addressing the overlap between ISO 330 and 500 relating to the objectives and the standback requirements. Now, notwithstanding these great proposals that they've now presented to the board, issues 6 and 7 really relates to the applying an integrated lens to these two topics. One, the integrated project could further explore whether the objectives in both standards are sufficiently distinct, whether they are appropriately focused on the outcomes under each of those standards, and two, whether I think this is Ada's favorite topic, whether the interrelationship of the suite of standback requirements across the ISOs, including in ISO 330, could be clarified. And with that, Tom, I give back the floor to you for questions to the board. Armand, next slide, please.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about the issues regarding alignment, which look relatively familiar because some of them were brought out by the 500 task force a couple board meetings ago. Any comment on that, Josephine?
Thank you. Yes, and I think that's absolutely spot on. The only one that I was worried about, and maybe you can just help me and give some more flavor to it, was the comment that it was confused. What was confusing about? But there was confusion about how you design and perform further audit procedures that are responsive to the assessed ROM. I mean, that has been a requirement that's been in our standards for many, many, many years, and so that was slightly alarming in a way that people had raised that point, because that's fundamentally what is part of the foundational standards. So I wonder if you could just maybe explain what was really meant behind that, because I can't imagine people would say that they don't understand that, given that's critical to the audit of the financial statements. But otherwise, yes, good collection of issues. Thank you.
You want to respond to that first, or before we call on Ada? Ada?
Yes, thank you. So maybe just to clarify, it's not my favorite topic at all, but I feel I need to address it. But no, we're talking about the standback. I don't think I need to make the comment that, of course, the issues in respect of technology and linkage is going to be entirely predicated on what we discussed yesterday and the roadmap that's going to be rolled out of it. Where I was struggling a little bit is the exploration of interrelationship and alignment of sufficiency, appropriateness, and persuasiveness. I think the ISA 500 task force has dealt with this, brought it to the board, concluded upon it, and we're done. And I don't think this needs to be further explored at all. Thank you.
Let me clarify the degree, I guess, of the issue. It's not really about, we're not proposing to redeliberate the matter. It's really about linking and maybe leveraging some of the explanation of the interrelationship between the sufficiency and appropriateness and persuasiveness of audit evidence, given that relevance of these concepts within 330 as well. It's really just linking.
That's quite different than the switching paper.
Okay, well, this is to clarify that point, and
Effectively, you're not going to work with concepts that were discussed to make sure they align with 500.
Anyone else? So it brings us to sort of the second area, and I just want to make sure, are there other issues that should be explored related to the alignment with proposed IAASB 5,000, 500, I mean? 5,000 is always on my mind.
and by the way, I didn't forget about the point that you made, but it's really a matter that we need to dive into and to consider whether it's truly an issue or not.
Any other issues? Other than to remind myself that it's 500, not 5,000. Okay, let's move forward.
It's me again, Tom. So this is now the third topic or bucket of issues relating to revising ISO 330. And yesterday, the board had a very robust discussion about the first two components of the proposed conceptual framework that the board will use to shape its technology position on addressing technology. Such obviously technology position will inform the development of the scope of the integrated project, particularly with respect to the approach for addressing technology across within ISO 330 and more broadly across the ISAs. Now, while the board broadly agreed that the IAASB's current posture as it develops or revises the ISAs is not to require, but to acknowledge and support the use of technology in audits within application material, the board did provide direction yesterday to promote, that's the word that was used, the use of technology in audits. The board also emphasized the intended outcome, that is to improve the quality of audits through use of technology, which in turn will enhance investors and stakeholders' confidence in audits. Now, we believe that it is important to take note of the board's direction in this area as we identify the technology-related issues we're trying to resolve in revising ISO 330. As probably Jasper alluded to it earlier, that the issues relating to technology presented to you today reflect key insights that was previously identified by the Audit Evidence Task Force and staff, which were presented as part of their previous agenda papers, particularly with respect to their deep dive analysis relating to technology. And so with that, on behalf of the entire risk response task, no, not task force this time, focus group, or kind of, I need a mental shift. Yeah, this is a staff-driven model. Forgive me. Just want to give a shout out to Kalina, Ida, Sue's leadership, and the entire Audit Evidence Task Force for building the foundational work on which we can build the work for revising ISO 330 and broadly the integrated project. So the issues here are basically categorized into two groups. Issues 8 and 10 and 15 relate to matters that directly impact the performance aspects in ISO 330, whereas these issues call for more fundamental revisions to ISO 330. And then issues 11 to 14 relate to matters that could they're both relevant to both the performance aspects in 330 and the reference framework aspects in 500 revised. So therefore, the integrated project would still need to consider the proposed revisions that had been made relating to the technology in ISO 500 revised. And that with time, I turn the floor back to you for questions to the board.
Okay, Sue?
Thanks, and thanks to the team for all the work here. It's there's a huge list of issues, and I'm sort of assuming that we're going to narrow some of these down. So some of the things I may sort of they are issues, but whether they're action for us, I guess, is probably the next stage. In this area, I think for me it follows on from some of the discussion we had yesterday. And probably the overarching issue is around this kind of categorization of procedures and how that plays into the use of ATT and things. And although elements of that come out in the individual issues that you've identified, I do wonder whether there might be a debate at a slightly broader level about the extent to which we focus on the category of things versus the extent to which the outcome is actually what we should be considering. So maybe that's, I don't know whether it's missing or whether it's just sort of a summarization of some of the issues. The feedback from practice is kind of like, 330 is not broken, but it is outdated. I think that's the key point here. And obviously there's a lot of work we did in 500 that we had to do in 500, but we now have the geography and there's material that can draw. One other point on sort of ATT, and again we probably discussed it yesterday, but I think we need to be thinking about whether we're talking about audit data analytics or ATT. The tools, maybe the tools that you use to perform the procedures. And the more we get into identifying some of these issues, I think we need to be quite precise about whether we're looking at the technology to do something or whether we're looking at the procedure and the outcome. Thanks.
Sachika?
Thank you. Actually, I intended to say similar to so I think many issues identified relate to the categorization of procedural issues, and therefore I also commented the same thing yesterday, but I think it's very, very important to promote the use of technology, because if we can address some of the issues, people are very happy to use technology, and I think it will actually will result in enhancing the quality of the audit as well, if they can use technology in an appropriate manner. So I think I really support these issues. Thank you.
Josephine?
And I agree with Sue's conclusion there at the end about, maybe we need to think about procedures and the output. The caution, I'm very, very open-minded about where we go with this. If we have to open everything up and rethink, that's fantastic. But we're a global standard setter, and what we are trying to achieve ultimately is comparability and consistency in the work that auditors are doing globally. That's really important. So to some extent, we do still need some of those check-in points and hooks and categories that everybody is aware of and applying within their methodology. So let's not lose sight of what our responsibility is as a standard setter from that perspective. But yeah, totally open-minded to where we go, but we'll always keep that at the back of our mind because that's really important. Thank you.
Yes, I agree that these issues should be considered as main priorities, and that I think that we'll need some clear guidance on the extent of procedures to be performed on ATT for the more complex one, but also in the context of a group audit. Thank you.
Wendy?
So you made the comment earlier about Silence's broad agreement with the issues, which is correct. And I presume the next steps, which I am, and the next steps would be to prioritize them somewhat. This is just throwing it all out and these are the issues. And then, so I agree, these are definitely the issues. And I agree with what I'm focused on it the same way that Josephine is in the big picture. We're driving towards audit quality where there's inconsistency, where clarity is needed. Personally, I'm not that hung up if we have the same thing in two standards, as long as it is the same thing and it doesn't contradict and doesn't then result in inconsistency. And then my last 2 points here are for the info gathering. Don't forget about the PCAOB. And then also I always have concerns, which I'll state here too, about the alignment with IAASB and their technology project as it relates to these issues. Thank you.
Wendy, thank you for that comment. I just wanted to make sure, and I agree with you, once you have a list of issues there, clearly there is a prioritization that can be done. But remember, the approach we're following at the moment is we are saying, are these the appropriate issues to explore? And they will probably all end up in the project proposal, unless the board tells us, no, that issue, it's not an issue. It shouldn't be part of revising ISO 330.
So I have a question on that, Billy. We may say that they're issues, but we may prioritize certain issues when we think of what are the public interest objectives of this project. Just so if you reminded myself of what happened with our fraud project proposal originally, we had a list of issues. We acknowledge that some of the issues would not be part of the project, though. So we could filter things out. I guess the question is, are we in the position yet to filter anything out? I thought we were just trying to dump the list of issues and then develop a filtering process, which could be part of some of the workshop activities later today.
You're quite right, Tom. What I was just suggesting actually is that as we go through this, because we've got this discussion at the board and obviously the breakout groups, the breakout discussions we're going to have, and then we come into September and then we want to approve the project proposal. So just have in your mind the whole time, if there is filtering that needs to be done, then just keep that in mind, because it would be good to also understand, yes, these are all on the table, or some of them might not be on the table, but I take Tom's point, maybe we don't have enough information yet to make that call.
And maybe just to add to that, really, so I think we can also, of course, when we come back in September, we can, of course, show the board as well, okay, these were the issues we had in March. This is where we think they fit, whether we should have them in the project proposal, include them, So on a prioritization basis, but we also may, on some of these issues, we may conclude that there is no issue with the standard, that is a more performance related issue. But again, for some of the issues, we're basing it on very limited information at this stage. So we need to do more outreach with stakeholders to better understand what the exact issues are.
Okay, thanks. Eric?
Yeah, I just noted that a number of the issues are cross-referenced into the 500 project where, and a number of them seem to have been addressed there, but it wasn't clear to me, again, whether you were questioning whether those have addressed the issue or not. So it sounded like it could be duplicated, and I just wasn't clear how we were proposing to deal with that. Maybe it's through further engagement on what is in 500 already. I don't know.
Okay. Heike, you want to come in?
Yeah, I do recognize, Eric, you're absolutely right. Most, if not all of those issues actually have been identified and responded to as part of the 500 project. But obviously, we're looking at it from the lens of the performance aspects in 330, and that we believe as a staff that they are relevant, and the issues, as Jasper have alluded to, can further evolve, and we could refine that as we dive into more information gathering and as informed by our breakout sessions today. So these are just to remind the board, these are just initial issues. This is not cast in stone as yet.
Right. Ada?
Thank you. 2 points. Yes, I recognize some of the aspects in respect of technology. I want to caution, though, that these are 330 type technology issues. I think our roadmap should drive where some of these issues will be addressed rather than taking a position now. And in respect of the discussion Tom and Willy were just having, I agree. I do not expect a fair number of these issues not to end up here. I feel that the staff has scraped the barrel for issues and presented them, and that we are focused on the issues where there's actually a need to fixing. Thank you.
Okay, Sue?
I just wanted to come back on Josephine on the comment around the categorization and maybe sort of clarify a bit, because you're absolutely right that sort of thing, it helps drive the structure of what we do, and it does underpin a lot of the methodologies. I think a number of the kind of practical issues are arising from the fact that in the standards we use some quite definite language sometimes. We say that there are 5 categories of something, or there are only these kind of things. And that's where you're getting to a position where you've got good quality output, and then having to try and retrofit into a category. And I just think that, where we are now with all the evolution, then you can have a recognition that there might be something that we can't even think about. But if the output is robust audit evidence, we should be able to kind of recognize that and allow that to be adopted. So I think even just removing some of the very definite, there are 5 categories of X would, there may be, or these may be the categories, are the kind of things that I think would probably assist in that kind of stuff, and thereby sort of promote the use of some of these tools.
Again.
Just want to recognize that, Sue, you're spot on. As a matter of fact, Julie had alluded to the same issue in the technology session in terms of the rigidness, perhaps, of how we categorize our procedures. And it's worth our while to have a look at it in terms of offering some flexibility, considering the changes in technology and how we perform audits.
Okay, any other comments on this question about use of technology? I think we're all, and you also got some agreement that we're open, casting the net wide now with the idea that we will narrow things down in the not so distant future.
Okay, so if we move on to the next topic, so the last driver or the last category on that that drives the changes in revising 330 is addressing the work effort on internal controls. So I mentioned it earlier. There was some respondents saying like because 315 has increased the work effort on understanding the entity system of internal control, it should flow through in 330, which we included a couple of issues on that regards. But also this topic is really of interest of any regulators. It has been for many years. They've consistently commented on some deficiencies on testing internal controls by auditors. It has been mentioned also by PIOB in a few meetings. So we know this is a really important topic that we need to discuss. I think this topic is one that we put a lot of issues there. We know that some of those issues might be more performance issue as opposed to a problem with the standard themselves. We have a specific questions for the breakout session for those groups that will be discussing this topic, just to have kind of the first view, like where should we, what is the root cause of the issue? So is it more standard or more performance? So we're gonna look at that a little bit later this morning, but just for completeness, we wanna just to put them all there. And yeah, so we have a complete list to discuss. So the issues, there's 8 of them. I'm not gonna go through them all, but it's really related to the nature, extent, and timing of those internal control testing and procedures, and evaluating the operating effectiveness of controls. Yeah, so happy to take the board's views on those.
And I note that this is a particular area that's generated attention from a public interest perspective, and has been a subject of my discussions with the PIOB on previous occasions. Or not?
Thanks. Assessing internal control is other area where we can explore how the technology is impacting. I believe that the use of the technology resources for assessing the internal control is other issue to add in this topic, in this list.
Sorry.
Yes, first I would like to thank the staff for the work they've done in analyzing the results of the inspections done, because I think it's very important to take a look at the results of the inspections and trying to identify what can be done to enhance the standards further, this standard specifically. Some of the more findings that we came across during our inspections were about, for example, reading of significant contracts. It happens so many times that there are significant contracts underlying some significant transactions within the financial statements, and sometimes those are not being read, or sometimes even if they are read, they're not read by somebody senior in the engagement, which leads out to missing some very important audit evidence eventually. Also, with regard to interim testing, for regard of the interim testing, it happens so often that interim testing is done, and then balance at the end of the year is compared to the balance at the interim testing date. And if the difference is not that material, then the auditor decide that nothing further needs to be done, although sometimes the movement can have significant, there can be some significant movements there. There can be some significant debits, credits that eliminate each other and not being addressed. So if this is one of the issues, I don't know if it can be clarified further through some additional application material or some additional paragraphs in the standard. One other thing also in terms of testing the controls, what we come across is that there is sometimes failure of linking the control to a specific risk. So you'll find that there is a testing of control, but there is no specific understanding of what this control really covers or why it is being applied. So, for example, in paragraph 10, we are starting with how the controls were applied, but maybe before that, it's just an idea to think of what risk the control exactly is trying to cover. For disclosures within financial statements, usually what we come across is that auditors do good disclosure checklists, and those checklists are very helpful, but not so often that they are being taken very seriously. So it's just like, yes, yes, no, no, not applicable, being done at the last moment. Again, I don't know what can be done or what can be said to place more seriousness with regard to the step. Maybe it has to be done by somebody senior, like a senior manager or director at the end before the whole engagement is concluded. So those are just some of the other findings that we come across as well. Thank you.
Billy?
Samia, just a question of clarification. When you talked about interim testing, I deduce from that you're not just referring to interim testing where internal controls are tested, but even where substantive procedures. Okay.
Sachkin?
Thank you. And I agree, this is the complete list that we need to address in some way. And next step is we need to filter the issue as to whether some of them are performance issue or whether some of them are the issue that we need to address in the standard. And maybe we also need to think about in the selection process, whether they're the issue that we need to address in the standard or whether we can address that in the non-authoritative guidance, because I think in some cases, maybe we cannot address in the standard itself, but rather it may be helpful to illustrate how to think about the standard rather than describing specific procedure. But because I think sometimes it's very difficult, particularly around this internal control issue, prescribe very detailed requirement in the standard, because it is depend on the circumstances. So I think maybe selection process will be performance or standard, and also whether non-authoritative guidance. That's for me. Thank you.
Eric?
Yeah, I'm supportive of all of the issues. The one I just questioned was number 22, which was about the use of evidence from previous periods. It wasn't really clear to me what the issue was. It just said might be a lack of clarity, but I don't know what that meant. So I just wasn't sure whether it needed to be on there or not.
Hi.
Thank you. I agree with these issues, and I also agree with what's been said earlier, that some of them may be more performance related than directly standards related, but some of the ones that are related to the performance may be because of the standard is not clear on what we're supposed to do. So I don't think we should park them as directly performance related, because it may be that some revising of the standard may help the actually performing the work as we intended it to be.
And this is an area that 315 really picked up on too, right? So you would imagine that there's some updating that needs to happen. Josephine?
Yeah, I was going to say exactly the same. Thank you, Kai, that I agree with all these issues. And I even if they are performance or methodology issues, if it's consistently occurring, it means that perhaps there is something not quite right with the requirements or with the application material in terms of interpreting those requirements. So we should still keep them on the list, as it were. Thank you.
Janine?
Thanks. Yeah, the paper is very good and detailed in describing areas where the standards are not aligned. And I have an additional concern, and that is from the behavioral practical application of the standards perspective, that impacts audit quality, and that also relates to, is it performance related or standard setting related? And it also relates to audit approaches chosen and maybe unintended consequences that result from that based on what is in the standards. And I like to highlight that and that is here in this part of the paper in 330 paragraph 8, that actually implies that you only test internal controls for effectiveness if substantive testing alone cannot provide audit evidence at the assertion level, the way it reads. Unclear is how this also relates to ITGC testing, which is a key element in the audit, also to assess whether data are complete and can be used for ATT, like data analytics. And paragraph 8 reads as if internal control testing actually is the exception, that you can read it that way. And in that sense, testing of effectiveness is not really promoted in general in the standard, if it's read in that way. So this is typically an example from performance related versus standard related. And if the internal controls are not tested for their effectiveness, this would theoretically, if you think about the audit risk model, lead to more substantive testing that needs to be done to address the detection risk. However, when there are deficiencies noted in the design and implementation of the internal controls, including in the ITGCs, think about segregation of duty issues, it can be through super users that can switch off logging or all those kind of things that auditors come across in practice. These deficiencies cannot always be overcome by more substantive testing and data analytics, the use of data analytics on internal information is also then, you cannot do that most likely because there's this completeness issue that you have to address. Yeah, all these practical consequences of this, there is in practice where most inspection findings also relate to how auditors then make their decisions in the audit and take the wrong approach in that sense. So yes, that's I think what I wanted to say. So and sometimes there is this inability to obtain sufficient and appropriate audit evidence resulting from deficiencies in the internal control in ITGC setting, and that I think that should also be more stressed, and that then cannot lead automatically to a clean opinion. So that's my biggest concern. Thank you.
Robert?
Just to comment as a matter of clarification or question, we've been discussing the effectiveness or operating effectiveness of controls, and also you approached it. But at the beginning, I think, and maybe this has been captured, and I didn't get it, it's are the controls designed as such in a matter to capture and assess all potential risks, number one. I think this is step number one. We all have to concur, I think, that control systems that have been implemented by preparers, by the entities, they need to change. They need to be adapted according to changes in the business model, according to changes in the accounting standards or whatsoever. So for me, it's very important to first assess whether the control design is effective, and then secondly, measure the operating effectiveness of the controls. Thank you.
Okay, anyone else? So I think driving your support for the general direction on the work on internal controls, but with some suggestions and nudges and focus on a few priorities.
Yeah. Just want to thank everyone for their input. I've noted a lot of additional or potential issues, so we're going to obviously do more information gathering and take them into consideration. So thank you.
Unless I missed it, and I did read the paper very carefully, there was that one element that we talked about, or I talked about, at the December meeting, which is to really look at decoupling this test of controls from 330 only. Because the test of controls, including the fact that we'd have to build in the design and implementation into this part as well, is that in the 315 part as well, is that you can use those to determine relevance and reliability of information as well. And that's actually really important. And that's probably going on now, but it doesn't sit into the definition of tests of controls, and it sits in 330, and it doesn't connect with the requirement to look at the design and implementation. So here is a point that almost, not the point that Sue was making, but the point that there's some really good stuff going on. But in that particular case, arguably the standard would prohibit that because of the way that the definitions are set up. And it's not in the issues because it didn't come out of what you've read before, but I did mention it at the last board meeting, and I think it's actually a really important point to look at. And I think that would be really helpful from a practical and a practitioner perspective as well. Thank you.
Should we go to the 520 section?
Fabulous, thank you. And thank you, Isabel, and thank you everybody for your contributions so far. I think we've got a lot to go in terms of refining our list of issues. And so before we do get to break out into smaller groups and workshop what that might look like, sorry, we are seeking your views about the issues that we've identified with ISO 520. Obviously, in performing the initial information gathering, we did notice that aside from ISO 330, ISO 520 was the other performance standard that kept being called out as a standard requiring revisions because of its direct relationship with the procedures described in ISO 330. And so when we considered what respondents to previous consultations had said and the types of procedures that are defined in ISO 330 as substantive procedures, so analytical procedures, we could identify that we could categorize issues under really two themes. One of them obviously is what we've talked about at length now between yesterday and just earlier in relation to the impact of technology and what that can mean for the performance of procedures and what kinds of procedures they are. But some that are actually more foundational to especially substantive analytical procedures around how to actually perform them properly. As opposed to Josephine's point, thinking about if there are, and Kai's point, if there are performance issues that are recurringly coming up in regulatory reports, whether there's something unclear or that could be refined in the standard to ease that process. So I won't go through all of them, obviously, because they are all on screen at the same time. But these were sort of the issues that we did find. So unless you did want any specific clarifications about any of these, I'm happy to sort of turn to you all and seek views on whether that is a complete list or whether it makes sense. If you had any questions.
Thank you, Anna. The key thing that stands out for me is the ability to have a robust expectation, and that drives everything as it comes to substantive analytics. In my experience, there's often some auditors are overly confident that they can establish a robust expectation, and so that is an issue that pops up. That doesn't surprise me. I'm not at all convinced that there's ambiguity in the terminology and some of the other things. I'm also a little bit remiss, but I'm looking at the technology workforce where there is non-authoritative guidance on outliers and exceptions, and it's not mentioned in here or acknowledged. And so question would be, was that not enough? Or is it already addressed? So I'm just unclear as to the status thereof. But so that's my reflection on it. 520 is not a standard that's too much used, given the complexity of this expectation that you need to have. So where do you see it used? In depreciation, in interest expense, well, relatively simple areas of the audit. But for this to be used in an area of revenue, that's going to be very difficult. Thank you.
if I can just respond to that, and I suppose that was part of the feedback effectively on that area, that because it is very hard to use, and so then our issue was, well, is there something in the standard that is making it harder to use in that area, and is there something we can look at in that context? But thank you.
Bill?
I don't want to add to your work, but you do ask for other issues. I just think that sampling has to be thought about in this same context, and particularly with technology. Not a wholesale change, but just I think we were having a look at.
Okay. Josephine?
Thank you. I just wanted to lend support to what Ada just said, and we've heard that in the UK as well. And oddly, comment that comes through is that there's nothing actually wrong with 520. It is around that expectation and really understanding what that means, how important it is, and how you get there. And so yes, I just wanted to sort of maybe tread caution with this one. Thank you.
Anyone else? Wendy?
As I listen to some of the comments here, because I think the issues are right, but I think I want to add documentation to it, because part of the expectation piece that I see in analytics is it just falls very short of what is really needed to have it be an accurate expectation to rely on from an analytics perspective. So, and I think the documentation piece threads through all of these standards from a interoperability perspective.
Okay. Anna?
No, okay, thank you. Those are all very valid contributions, and I'll definitely tread with caution as advised. I think I'll hand it back to Jasper to just walk us through the way forward.
We have one more question first on the information gathering. So the paper sets out the future information gathering we're anyway planned right now to do. But we are very much interested whether, and I think Wendy already mentioned some things earlier to PCAOB, for example, whether there are other things that you think we should reach out to get a better understanding of some of the issues. That was the idea of this question. See whether there's anything else we could do.
Julie.
Yes, for a couple things. One, you mentioned the PCAOB, and I think it's important to think about that. They did issue I'm not sure if they call it an exposure draft, but something that was put out for comment on, I think it was under the guise of technology, but in actual fact, some of the questions that were in there and some of the content did revolve around this issue around what's a sustainable analytic, how is that different from a test of detail. So it might be worth taking a look at some of the commentary that they got back on that. I think it's public and we can look at that. I certainly looked at our letter in preparation for this session, knowing that it did veer from technology into some of these topics. So that would be good to look at. It's also probably ties into Josephine's point around using controls to test relevance or reliability, I guess, at the end of the day. And that is something that we see done quite a bit in our audits that are done under the PCAOB standards. And so, Josephine, you referred to the fact it's happening. It's happening. We don't really call it out in our standards, but I think it's a good point to look at potentially that topic as well from the other standard setters' perspective, because they do require it in a number of cases.
Josephine?
And there's another source, which is actually the Institute of Internal Auditors are looking again at risk response in the context of the organizations they're operating in, applying new technology, bringing new technology on board, and particularly in relation to AI, for example. And I know we're crossing here, but it might be worth looking at some of the documents and what they're thinking about. It sort of goes back to Sue's point around, how the way they're approaching things is moving away from this traditional audit and they're looking at the output and what's coming in there. So I'm not articulating it very well at all. So apologies to the Institute of Internal Auditors. But anyway, it is worth checking in with them and seeing what their thinking is in this area too. Thank you.
Anyone else? Vesper?
Yeah, and then we go to the way forward. Go to the next slide. So we will continue our information gathering activities as noted in this paper, and of course with the additions that you mentioned as well, and now Julie and Josephine will go through those as well. Of course, we'll also continue to liaise with the other IAASB projects like the audit evidence, of course, and technology. And of course, we'll liaise with the focus group, keep them closely involved in what we are doing. In September, we'll share the results of the further information gathering. We'll also go through, therefore, we'll also start developing the project proposal. We'll start to narrowing down the issues that we're going to address, so the prioritization, and whether there's a need to address something in the standard or not. And then the board can comment on that, and we'll go from there to a project proposal in December. We hope to approve that. So go now to the after the break, we go to the private workshop session. So as mentioned already before, it's really to have more in-depth discussion to obtain deeper insights on the issues that each of the groups are discussing. There are in total 5 groups, and these groups will answer different questions. There are questions 1 and 2, category 1 and 2. So there are questions 1 to 5 will be discussed by group 1 and 2. And group 3, 4, and 5 will discuss the other questions in the paper. Of course, when you run out of when the discussions are done, you can always, of course, go to the next questions as well. If you go to the next slide, you can see in which group you are and in which conference room you are. Conference room A and B are over there. Room C is here, and then actually C and D are here, and it should be E and F are over there. So group 4 meets in E, and group 5 meets in F. And I think with that, Tom, I want to thank everybody for the contribution. I think it's really good input, good direction on where to focus on now first. Yes, thank you all.
Okay, before we move off the risk response section, Janine, I don't know if you have any further observations you want to make on risk response.
Not specific, only that I think it's a very, well, the integrated project as a whole is very important project. When to address also the technology and internal control areas altogether. So looking forward to all the further information gathering and the further outcomes of this project. Thank you.
Thanks, Janine. Okay, so we're gonna close the public sessions of the meeting now. So let me just thank everyone on the public record for all the work that has gone into this week's meeting, the teams, staff, the TAs, the board members, the task forces, for all you've done in preparation for this meeting. We've talked about definitions being everyone's favorites, but as you know, minutes are mine, and the draft minutes will be ready in due course, which is we're getting them done more quickly now, and then we'll be posting them for approval in June. A couple of things to note. I think we talked about it in an administrative session, but for the public record, there will be no board call on April 17th that will be canceled. So our next IAASB meeting will be June 18th to 21st in Madrid. We will post the agenda for that as soon as possible. Just if you're waiting and marking your calendar, when will the posting begin? We know that it'll begin somewhere around May 27th with all the materials posted by May 31st. In fact, I know from recent history, we've posted things a little bit more quickly. So maybe it'll be before May 27th. And if you're celebrating a bank holiday that time, you'll have beach reading as well. So that's one thing to say. I think that's about really all I want to say for the public record, other than we've made some significant progress on a few of our key strategic areas. If you think about it, I reiterate my confidence that we're going to reach conclusion on ISSA 5000 on schedule in September. We have some work still to do, some outreach still to do, and some coordination with IAASB still to do. But there's nothing that came up this week that would give me pause to think our timetable is incorrect. So I feel highly confident. We really had a good discussion on a number of other key areas, including going concern. I'm looking forward. My appetite's been whetted on some of the key meeting topics there. We seem to have a direction, if not quite a stance, and maybe we'll get it passed in June, or at least have a pretty good sense of what our position, whatever we're going to call it, on technology is, if not the roadmap yet, by June, which will help facilitate some of the work on risk response and 520 and audit evidence. We could still be running somewhat in parallel as we finalize things. And clearly feel pretty confident about where we're getting to on audit evidence, the fact that we have a basis for some of the outreach that needs to be done now as a result of the comment process, and we'll continue our risk response questions now. Before we close the session, Janine, any general observations for the week?
Yes, thanks a lot, Tom. I'd like to commend the board with a very good meeting, well prepared also by the task forces, and well led. Important to note in this respect that there was a very good process made on the sustainability project, which sets the board in a good position to meet their timelines for the project. And I'd like to reiterate the importance of further coordination with IAASB on definitions and terminology used. And I'd like to encourage the board to look at the way limited assurance is described, with a very broad spectrum from just below reasonable assurance to the low end, and whether that may lead to unintended consequences in practice in relation to the elevated level of work effort in the standard for limited assurance, which should be the leading for practitioners for the level of confidence on these assurance reports in the market. The first overview of feedback received on the going concern projects showed a few areas with opposing views, and I'd like to take the opportunity to remind the board of the importance of this project in view of narrowing the expectation gap, and that it should move the needle given the great support and to actually enhance auditor behavior. Coordination with the IAASB is key, but it's also a story like the chicken or egg, and not who was first, but who moves first. It's important that the auditor obtains sufficient and appropriate evidence on management's going concern assessments for the expanded 12-month period when needed, and that the outcome of work done is transparent to protect investors and serve the public interest. The integrated project on 330 and 520, which now also includes technology, internal control, and finalizing the audit evidence standard, is a key project, in my view, to impact enhanced auditor behaviors and audit quality, particularly a proactive posture to drive the right use of technology, address how it contributes to audit quality, and to implement safeguards for risks. It is important that this project also clarifies the minimum level of work effort on internal controls testing, including ITGCs that is required, and that it clarifies the interactions between internal control work and substantive testing, including when substantive testing cannot compensate identified deficiencies in the design and implementation or operating effectiveness of internal controls, including the ITGCs, and of course the consequences thereof for the ability to obtain sufficient appropriate audit evidence and the ability to use the data for data analytical tools. Strengthening and clarifying the role of internal controls in auditing may also enhance auditors' detection of fraud risk and indicators of fraud. The workshop we had on technology and the one we're going to have later this morning on risk response will give a good start for this very important project. And last but not least, I like to point to you our public interest issues that we publish, the PIOB, on its website for the various issues that are in there that are key to be addressed in all the current projects. And this was my last planned IAASB observation. So I feel a little bit sad as well. I will move to the IAASB observation team going forward, but I will, of course, keep a close eye on how you will continue with the current projects and where they will end. And I will contribute, of course, to that also within the PIOB. But I will know I'm not planned for doing any IAASB observation of meetings going forward. So thanks a lot.
Thank you, Janine, for your support and for your interaction and for your service. So, we wish you well in your IAASB observation. And okay, I think we're going to close the public meeting. Could we just stay here for a